everybody, Mrs. McHugh here with you. Today we are going to be solving some multi-step equations with variables on just one side of the equal sign. So when we say multi-step, we mean that we're looking at an equation that has probably 3 to 4 terms. It could even have more. It might have some distributive property in there. So we're taking our two-step equations and we're just building on it, making them a little bit bigger, okay? So our first one that we're going to do today, and remember these are your notes, so you should be writing them down so that way you have an example to look back at. All right, so number one, we have 18 minus 5w plus 7w minus 4 equals 28. So that's our first problem that we're going to be doing. Okay, so the first thing I like to do is I like to draw my line. Remember, we're going to have our column for our equal sign. Our equal sign stays in its own lane all the way down while we solve our problem. The next thing I like to do is look for, on each side of the equal sign, any terms that are alike. So remember, like terms have the same variables. Those variables have the same exponents, or they might not have any variables at all. So on the left side of the equal sign, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. My 4 terms are 18, negative 5w, positive 7w, and negative 4. So which ones are alike? Well, 18 does not have a variable with it. We call that a constant. So a constant is a term that has no variable, only a number. So 18 is a constant, so is negative 4. Negative 4 is also a constant, so those are like terms. Then I see that I have a negative 5w, and notice how I am circling or boxing the sign in front of the term, because that's telling me whether it's negative or positive. And then I have a positive 7w. Those two are alike, so I'm going to put a box around those. So the next step, which we don't always do as we move along in our math career and as we get better and better at these, but something that can be helpful when you're first starting to solve long problems like this is using the commutative property to write our like terms next to each other. And usually we would take our variables and write those first. Negative 5w, positive 7w, and then behind it, I'm going to put my 2 constants. This didn't have a sign in front of it, so it's positive, so I'm going to write it as a positive 18, and this is a negative 4. So now what I'm going to do is combine my like terms. So remember, to go from here to here, I use the commutative property. The commutative property tells us that we can change the order of what we write. And the way that I always remember that is it starts with a CO, change order. Okay? All right, here we go. Negative 5w plus 7w. So we have a negative and a positive. So if we have 5 negative w's and 7 positive w's, I now have 2w. Positive 18 and negative 4 make positive 14. So I write plus 14. And up here, I should have brought down that equal sign and that 28. I'm sorry I didn't do that, so let me do that now. Okay, so every time I'm just bringing down the rest of the problem, my equal sign is staying lined up the whole way. Okay, I now have a two-step equation. So in my two-step equation, I always want to go backwards through my order of operations. So remember, I'm doing addition or subtraction first, then I'm working with the multiplication or division. So this means 2 times w plus 14 equals 28. So I'm going to do the inverse of positive 14 or plus 14, which would be to subtract or add negative 14 to both sides. All right, so 2w, I'm going to bring him down. A positive 14 and a negative 14 make 0. So I don't even need that anymore. I'm going to bring down my equal sign, and 28 minus 14 is 14. Okay, so now I have 2w equals 14. So at this point, I'm going to divide both sides by 2. So I'm going to divide by the coefficient. Remember, the coefficient is the number that is in front of the variable. Okay, I use my constant first, then I'm using my coefficient. So 2 divided by 2 makes 1w, which is awesome because that's the point of solving an equation, is to get one variable by itself on one side. So I'm going to bring that closer to the equal sign for my final answer. 14 divided by 2 is 7. So my final answer is w equals 7. All right. Give you a minute to make sure that you have that written down. You can also pause the video to do that. And we're going to do another one this time. All right, let's throw in some commutative property, or I'm sorry, some distributive property. Who remembers what distributive property is? So our distributive property tells us that if we're multiplying a quantity in parentheses, we can take that number and multiply everything in the parentheses by that, okay? So I'm going to use a short example this time. 7 times 2x minus 3 equals 21. All right, so once again, we're going a little faster this time. I'm going to draw that line right there, my column for my equal sign. All right, here we go. So I am going to multiply 7 times each term inside the parentheses. Now, what are my two terms inside the parentheses? Let's make sure we can identify those. We have a 2x and a negative 3. Are those like terms? Not right now, they're not, are they? All right. So let's go ahead and multiply 7 times 2x and 7 times negative 3. Now a step that I don't always write, but I'm going to write for you right now so you can see what we're doing, is we're multiplying 7 times 2x. We're also multiplying 7 times negative 3. That's really what we're doing when I draw those two arrows, okay? All right, so 7 times 2x. So we're just multiplying our numbers together. Our variable stays on the end. So 7 times 2 is 14. The x stays on the back. 7 times negative 3 is negative 21. So I write a negative 21. Notice I didn't write plus negative 21. I just wrote negative 21. All right, equals 21. I just brought this down all the way from up there. Now we're back to a two-step equation again. Okay, so on our two-step equation, we are now going to start with our constant, which is negative 21. And I'm going to do the inverse of that on both sides. That would be positive 21. So 14x comes down. Negative 21 and positive 21 makes 0. Bring down my equal sign. And 2 and 2 make 4. 1 and 1 make 2. So I have 42 right there. All right. I'm going to keep on going. My last step is to divide both sides by my coefficient. So I'm going to divide both sides by that coefficient, which is 14. And on this side, I should always be left with 1. 14 divided by 14 is 1x. I'm going to bring them closer. And 42 divided by 14 is 3. Now you may use a calculator when you're doing this to do little operations like this. You are allowed to use a calculator for that. You should be using your TI-30XA. Hopefully you have one of those. I can show you that in the next video. I don't have one handy right now, but it's a great calculator to get. Okay, we're gonna move on to one more. I lied, we have 2 more. Okay, so we're gonna do number 3, which now is going to just give us a little fraction practice. You know, a lot of times we don't like fractions, but fractions are just like any other number. We still work them out the same way, so there's nothing to be scared of. So our fraction problem is going to be, this is number 3, negative 1/6 times the quantity 24x minus, oops, I forgot my x, 24x minus 60 plus 2x equals negative 16. So this guy looks like a biggie, but we know the steps to working it out. We know exactly what to do. So first thing we want to do is we want to get rid of these parentheses, okay? Parentheses are like surrounding this. 24x and negative 60 can't come out until we do something. What's that thing that we do to get them out of the parentheses? We distribute. So that means that we are going to multiply negative 1/6 times, and I'm going to use a dot this time, 24x. And then I'm also going to be multiplying negative 1/6 times negative 60. I'm going to go ahead and bring the rest of the problem down. Okay, I know that because I wrote all of that out, my equal sign is not going to line up just yet. Did you notice how I didn't draw that? I'm going to wait until the next step to draw it when I start doing things on both sides. Okay, now I'm back to like 6th grade. In 6th grade, you should have done tons and tons of fractions and decimals. So I'm multiplying negative 1/6 times 24. So I need to first make that 24 into a fraction as well. So I have negative 1/6 times 24 over 1. So when we multiply our fractions, we can go across the top and across the bottom. Okay, so we have 1 times 24, which is 24. 6 times 1 is 6. And 24 divided by 6 is 4. Now we had a negative times a positive, which means this should be a negative. And I don't want to forget about that little x. I'm going to bring him all the way down and put him on the end. Okay, another way you can multiply fractions is if you don't want to go across the top and across the bottom, you can do it, some people call canceling, some people call it cross reducing. There's lots of different names that teachers out there use. And what it is it's like we're simplifying these numbers before we multiply them. And it gives us smaller numbers to work with when we multiply across the top and across the bottom. So I have a 6 and a 60. What number divides evenly into 6 and 60? Well, 6, right? So if I divide both of these numbers by 6, before I do any multiplication across top and bottom, I can use little numbers. 6 divided by 6 is 1. Negative 60 divided by 6 is negative 10. Now I'm going to go across the top and across the bottom. 1 times 10 is 10. 1 times 1 is 1. 10 divided by 1 is 10. Notice I didn't look at my signs yet. I'm going to go back now and look at my signs. I had a negative times a negative, so that gives me a positive. Did I have an x on this guy? Nope. So now I have negative 4x plus 10, and now I'm going to bring down the rest of my problem. Plus 2x equals negative 16. And now I'm ready to go ahead and start using all my steps that I know to solve equations. All right. I did distributive property. Second thing I'm going to do, look for like terms. So I have a negative 4x. I have a positive 2x. Those are alike. And then I have a positive 10. Now this time I'm not going to use the commutative property to rewrite it. If this was on a piece of notebook paper, I'd be pretty far down already, wouldn't I? I'm going to go ahead and just do these two in my head. Negative 4x and positive 2x. Well, that makes negative 2x. Positive 10 doesn't have any other like terms with it. Do not get confused with this guy. He is not considered a like term because he's on the other side of the equal sign. He's on the other side of the road, isn't he? Here's my road. They can't combine together if they're on opposite sides of the road. So I'm going to bring down my positive 10, bring down my equal sign and my negative 16. All right, I'm back now to a two-step equation. We know how to do this, so I'm going to go ahead and do the inverse of positive 10, which would be negative 10. Bring down my negative 2x. Negative 16 and negative 10 make negative 26. And then divide both sides by the coefficient, which is negative 2. Negative 2 divided by negative 2 gives me 1x. And negative 26 divided by negative 2 is positive 13. And there you have it. I know that one seemed like a lot of work. Getting to know these fractions, the better, or the more we do them, the better you'll get at them. And then you won't have to write quite as much out, okay? It'll get better, I promise. The more we do, the better we get, which is why we give you practice. All right, we have one problem left, okay? And remember, you can always come back to this video to look at any other help that you need. If you need to just look at fractions, you can always come back, fast forward just to number 3. I'm hoping you're writing all this down so that way you have it to refer back to step by step for your notes when you're working out the problems for practice and when you're doing the short quiz on your own. All right, last problem we're gonna do. We're gonna throw in a little bit of a negative now with our distributive property, just to remind ourselves what it means if we see a negative without a number there. So number 4 is 3 minus 13 minus c plus 8c equals 35. Okay, I keep writing on the board. I was wondering where those marks were coming from. All right, so remember, first thing we've got to do is get those terms out of the parentheses so that way we can use them. We can't use them when they're stuck inside the parentheses. How do we get terms out of the parentheses? Distributive property, you got it. Okay, so really when I see this negative and I know that I need to distribute, what number is there if I don't see it? I had a teacher tell me one time, it's like a ninja. The number 1, it's like a ninja. It's all by itself and it's like hiding behind things. It pops out. So there's nothing here. It's really a negative 1. He's there, you just don't see him. So we call that implied. We say there's an implied 1. If I imply something, it means that I'm saying it without really saying it. So there's a 1 there, even though I don't really see it. So this negative 1 is what we're gonna multiply times each one of these. So the first thing I'm gonna do though is bring down this 3 that's sitting in front. It's kind of in an awkward place. I'm just gonna bring that 3 down. He's not part of the distributive property. I'm gonna multiply negative 1 times 13, and negative 1 times positive 13 is negative 13. Negative 1 times negative c. Now again, the c doesn't have anything in front of him, right? But he's really not alone. What's there if we really don't see it? An implied 1. So there's really a 1 here as well. So what you're doing without realizing it is you're multiplying negative 1 times negative 1 to get positive 1. When we get to algebra, we don't write positive 1c. Because if it's just a variable by itself, there's just one of them, we know that when there's not a number there, okay? So I'm gonna write plus c. Let's bring everything else down. Plus 8c equals 35. And now I'm gonna go ahead, draw my lines, and let's go ahead and get started. I'm looking for like terms. What are the like terms? I hope you're saying to yourself that you see a positive c and a positive 8c, and that you're seeing a 3 and a negative 13. You will always see me work with my variables first, okay? Because grammatically correct, okay, is really we write standard form with our variables first and our constants behind it. So that's why you'll always see me do that. All right, so I have a c plus 8c, so that gives me 9c. It's like 1 cat plus 8 cats gives me 9 cats. And then I have a 3 and a negative 13. So when I combine 3 and negative 13, I get negative 10. Bring down my equal sign and my 35. I'm now down to 3 terms only in my problem. So now we're going to do a 2-step, which is working with that constant first, adding 10 to both sides. That's the inverse of negative 10 is positive 10. Hope you're getting the hang of some of those words now. Okay, term, terms. These are all terms. This is an inverse when you do the opposite. Inverses, when you add them together, always make 0. I'm now left with 1 term on each side. And my last step is to divide by the coefficient. That coefficient is the number in front of the variable. What's this guy called if he doesn't have a variable with him? A constant. All right. So the last thing I'm going to do is divide both sides by 9. 9 divided by 9 makes 1c, and 45 divided by 9 is 5. So c is equal to 5. All right, that is multi-step equations with variables on one side. Next time you see me, we're going to be doing multi-step equations with variables on both sides. They just keep growing and getting bigger, and they're my favorite, which is why math is my jam. Love me some math. Hope you're starting to like math too, and we'll see you on the next video.